All right, good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Faye. This is our nightly discussion on things that are important to us in the country. I know that there are several news channels right now discussing exit polls. We're not discussing exit polls because I don't think it's important, given everything that's happening around us. We have been discussing the lack of the oxygen shortage, the bed shortage, the impact it's having on our cities, the impact it's having on our healthcare workers, our doctors, our nurses, our mental care pandemic. But we also need to look at the impact it's having on the economy, because the government has made a series of decisions. And it's important to also understand whether these decisions were the right ones or whether we have made faulty decisions as a country. For example, the government has decided not to call a nationwide lockdown this time at 3.79 lakh cases per day, whereas it called a nationwide lockdown last year at 500 cases altogether. Many states are still reluctant to call lockdowns. Uttar Pradesh, for example, is locked down between Friday and Monday, Tuesday morning as of now, and still not locked down entirely. And we hear, cases of complete desperation, stories of complete desperation coming out of states like Uttar Pradesh. Karnataka announced its lockdown very, very late. Bangalore is reporting nearly 20,000 cases a day. So what impact will this have on our economy in the long term, given the decisions that have been made by the government? Now, before I go further, I want to share, and I want to draw your attention to an article that came out right now on the 22nd of April. This was last week. And speaking really at an event, the Chief Economic Advisor of the Government of India, Mr. Subramaniam, said, and I quote, "The second wave of COVID-19's impact on the Indian economy will not be very large." He said, "I don't think, given the predictions that have been made by researchers, that the pandemic should not extend beyond May. And based on that, we've done some internal assessments, and I don't think the impact will actually be very large on the economy." He said, all of us economists actually have to say these things with enormous dose of humility, because not only in India, but every other country, predicting the pandemic has been extremely difficult, end quote. And that, I'm flabbergasted by that statement, really, with the fact that the economic advisor as of last week believed that this second wave, which is the worst health crisis India has ever seen in the history of this country, will not last past the month of May. And on what basis he believes that something like this won't have a very large impact on our economy. To help us sort of understand that impact and the decisions we have made on pricing of vaccines, on lockdowns, on any sort of help that we can or cannot give the citizens of this country, joining me this evening are a very illustrious set of economists. Mr. Guruswamy, a noted economist and the former advisor to the Finance Minister of India, Professor Santosh Mehrotra and Professor Arun Kumar. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. I hope you are all well and your families are well as well. I want to get started with simply this. Professor Mehrotra, if I may start with you. The estimate that the impact of this catastrophe will not be too hard on our economy, is that something you agree with?
Not at all. We are talking about a financial economist who told us that the demonetization in 2016 by the Prime Minister was a wonderful thing for the economy. One. Two, this is an economist who wrote in last year's economic survey about the fact that, our small enterprises are not creating that many jobs. It's the larger enterprises which are creating jobs. And he completely forgot that there was an unorganized sector in the economy. He doesn't even seem to be aware of the existence of an unorganized sector, which provides 80% of the jobs and 40% of the GDP and exports. Third, this is an economist who led the team which wrote that the fiscal stimulus in FY21 was 8% of GDP, when no one in their right mind believes that it was more than 2% of GDP. Fourth, this is an economist who told us what a wonderful thing the lockdown was and what wonderful things it did for the economy. He is a financial economist. He should go back to the Indian School of Business. Let us just remind ourselves that the second man in command in the Ministry of Finance, just under him, is not even an economist. He's a historian. He doesn't have a master's in economics. He doesn't have a PhD in economics. Obviously, he can't, because if he doesn't have a master's in economics. And this is your economist team, which is advising this government. What do you expect other than what he's saying? You don't expect anything else. So let us not even begin.
So Professor, what you're saying, is it fair to assume that since the central government well into April, from January, in fact, ignored what experts said about a second wave, ignored all of the caution, continued to assure us that everything was okay? Is this in the same way and in the same spirit Absolutely. To continue this assure people that everything
is okay? Unbelievable that he has the gall and the audacity and the boldness to make a statement of this kind. Let me give you just offhand, because I saw the question that you were about to ask us, and I put down 6 points. So let me put, just detail those 6 points. First of all, people are dying left, right, and center. They are falling ill at a phenomenal pace. We are being told that there were 3.79 lakh cases today or yesterday. Actual number of cases is probably at least 10 to 20 times larger than that, which of course the government is not capturing for the simple reason that it is not testing. And in fact, the government told the private sector, certainly in UP, certainly in Delhi, in meetings, I'm aware of this, control the numbers, manage the numbers. The private sector labs were not being allowed to do the testing. That's why we waited. I personally waited 5 days to get a test done for my family.
No. Forgive me for
let us not believe their numbers.
When you say the government told private sector laboratories to control the numbers, which government are you referring to?
I'm talking about the central government, and I'm talking about the UP government, about which I'm aware. But let me go back to your real question about jobs, about the economy and the impact of the economy. Let's just go back to that, because let's just first demolish that before we come back to the health of people. First of all, we know perfectly well what is happening, what impact this will, the health impact will have on labor productivity. Labor is a factor of production. Workers are not going to turn up for work. They cannot turn up for work. This economy is not run by people who work from home. This economy is run, 90% of the people actually have to go to work in order to work. So they are ill, their families are ill, and their labor productivity is impacted. Point one. Point two, if people are not turning up for work, regardless of whether it is factories or service enterprises, supply channels are going to break down. They are getting disrupted as we speak. Thirdly, all this is already causing a massive massive decline in demand, because incomes will collapse. Jobs will be lost on a massive scale as supply channels break down. Fourth, all of the decline in government activity, of economic activity is going to reduce tax revenues of the government. So in other words, the government's capacity in the rest of the financial year to actually undertake government expenditure to help people, which it wasn't doing enough of in any case, because the chief economic advisor told us that the government spent 8% in FY21 on its fiscal stimulus, when in fact it was just 2%. Five, personal savings are going to collapse. Personal savings were already falling very sharply under this government. Between 2013, when household savings stood at 24% of GDP, by 2019, they had fallen to 17% of GDP. In other words, a 7 percentage point decline in household savings before this crisis broke. Can you imagine what has happened to jobs and incomes since then? Poverty has increased, so personal savings are going to collapse. Household savings are going to collapse. There'll be much less money available for investment when the economy revives.
So, Professor, are you arguing for a lockdown or against a lockdown?
No, I'm not arguing for a lockdown. The lockdown last time, I think I've said it in your show many times over, and I'm now going to repeat it. There were 4 problems with that lockdown, and several of those things can happen again, if given the proclivity of this government. One, it was too sudden, unplanned, when there were less than 600 cases. You have today 3.79 lakh cases in a day. Point 2, it was unnecessarily national in scope. China did not do a national lockdown. They started the COVID, and they locked down only Wuhan city, the capital of Hubei province. Then they locked down Hubei province, and they locked down a few other major cities. They prevented travel to happen from Wuhan to the rest of the country, but travel between Shanghai and the rest of the country, or Beijing and the rest of the country, was happening. Thirdly, it was needlessly stringent. It was the tightest lockdown in the world. Who told them to do the most stringent lockdown in the world and kept it going for several weeks? You destroyed the economy. The impact we know. The impact was the worst contraction for any major economy in the world. The worst in the entire financial year FY21, of all G20 countries, our economic contraction is the worst, because for 2 reasons. One, because of the nature of the lockdown, which destroyed so many lives and livelihoods. And then the government didn't respond with a fiscal stimulus, which was necessary. Our fiscal stimulus was actually 2.2%.
Okay, I'll come back to you on that point. I just want to bring in the other guests as well. But before I do that, let me just share and I know this is going to annoy all 3 of you, but it's being asked in the chat window. So I'm going to share the Sensex over the last 1 week in the last 5 days has moved up in a rally of 3,000 points. No one knows why. Of course, there will be many experts who will try and figure out why, but no one knows why the Sensex has gone up 3,000 points in the last 5 days. That's what it looks like. It makes absolutely no sense. Mr. Guruswamy, the question I want to ask you is this. The central government has not called a lockdown. State governments are reluctant to do so. Even the ones who are doing it are not calling it a lockdown because they're afraid of backlash. So Karnataka called it a close down. MP called it a COVID curfew. So nobody wants to use the term lockdown anymore because of the distress it caused last year. But is there an economic price to doing nothing? And is that price likely to be higher than by making active decisions?
Well, this is what I suspect. At 3.8 lakh cases a day, there is a huge cost to this. If this is not controlled, this will be expected to reach 1 million cases a day by the end of July. And Ramanan Lakshminarayan says that we will have 1 million deaths by August, mid-August in this country. And there's a huge cost to that. Already our systems are all collapsed and stretched. You might not have enough people going to work. If this continues, this trend continues, where will the labor come from? Where will the workers come from? Companies will have to cut down because there are no workers. So there is going to be an economic cost. Last time, we inflicted an economic cost when there was no cost. There were only 543 cases, all told in the country. And now we've crossed 1 million, well over 1 million, 3 million now, total cases. And so there is going to be a huge cost. So you've got to act. But not the kind of stupid lockdown we did last time, without preparation, without putting money into people's hands, into their bank accounts, without opening food kitchens, without providing rations, without taking care of all these things, you don't do a lockdown. Because the cost, the pain you will inflict is going to be horrible, horrific. So, you don't pile on to the problems, pile on to the miseries. You act sensibly. Don't go grandstanding again. Modi is driven by grandstanding, not by practical realities and economic realities. Why did he do demonetization? Same thing with grandstanding. He thought all the money will start appearing in bank coffers, and then a lot of it will not be declared. None of it was true. And the same thing happened in the first lockdown. He said in 21 days it will all be over. And we would have triumphed over it.
Yeah.
And he crowed in February. He said this is a lesson, object lesson for the world. The world should learn from us.
Exactly.
We are the Vishwa Gurus in handling Corona. And by end of February, early March, we were in the throes of a second wave, and a terrible second wave. Before that, we knew in January that there were 2 mutants floating around. Bombay had the second mutant visible in middle of January. Any sensible, intelligent government which had done strategic planning or war game the situation would have said, this is all what we need. Now, I was reading today about this district collector Nandurbar in Maharashtra. 3 months ago, he decided we're going to have oxygen shortage. We're going to have shortage of beds. We're going to have shortage of wards. And he prepared. In one district, Nandurbar district doesn't have oxygen shortage because he's got 2 oxygen plants functioning in the hospital. He's ordered beds. He's got beds there. He's ordered ventilators. He's got ventilators. He's ordered new wards, expansion of the hospital. All that is in place. We could have done that on national scale. 658 districts in the country. We could have done that. For that, you need a prime minister who can conceive of these things. Think in this.
But Mr. Guruswamy, it can be argued that these are decisions that should be made at state and district levels and not necessarily from the PMO.
No, the problem is so big and so widespread. It has to be coordinated from the center, from the PMO. The PMO is the fulcrum of this system. I remember when there was this onion shortage, Brijesh Mishra tried to make out a case that the finance ministry was sleeping. At that time, I had to deal with it in the media, and I said, look, onion shortages are anticipated by the food ministry, civil supplies, and imports are facilitated by the commerce ministry. Not the finance ministry only looks after M1. And that was delegated to the RBI. Finance ministry can only allocate funds when somebody asks for it. And that function has to be done by the PMO. You coordinate different departments. Who is going to coordinate production of oxygen? Who is going to coordinate import of serum raw materials? This should all be done. And I'm not told that we're going to run into a problem with packaging. Because the number of demand for bottles and vials is so great that our own capacity is strained.
Okay, let me just bring in Professor Arun Kumar at this point. Professor Kumar, a lot of people suffered job loss last year. It was terrible. In almost every household, people had either lost jobs or they received very severe pay cuts. Is this likely to get a lot worse now going forward?
Yeah, so, let's step back a little. It's going to be much worse than last year because as we saw, and as you pointed out, last year in March, we had only a few hundred cases a day. And then, we locked down and the wave continued till mid-September, even though we started unlocking in June, whereas every other country started unlocking when the number of cases had come down. We started unlocking last year when the cases were still going up very rapidly, and July and August were rather bad. So till mid-September, we had the wave. Now this year, we have started the wave at 10,000 cases in mid-February when the cases started going up, So the minimum was 10,000. So the wave is going to be much bigger because you see there's a community spread that has taken place because of the super spreader events that we had, whether it be the Mahakumbh, whether it be the Jallikattu, whether it be the elections, etc. So it's become a community transmission. You are getting reports from small towns and from villages of people who are falling sick. That was not the case last time. Now, when you have such a huge wave that is taking place, and as Mohan was saying, there are projections saying that by mid-May, we could have 1 million cases a day. And at that rate, we would have roughly about 5 million active cases and more. Now at 5 million active cases and more, you need 15% hospital beds, So that comes to 75,000 a day. So you're going to have a breakdown already at, 3.5 lakh cases. You have a breakdown of hospitals, breakdown of the crematoriums and the dargahs and so on, So there's going to be complete chaos in the next 10 to 15 days if it continues like this. That's why since March, I've been saying that we should lock down, because lockdown is not a solution to the disease, but it prevents people from mixing. At this point, you cannot do testing, you cannot do contact tracing. You'll have to contact trace crores of people, which is impossible. And therefore, you can't stop it just by allowing it to continue and so on. So what you need to do is a complete lockdown at the national level. And then only in 10 to 15 days, you'll begin to see a come down. Because if you only do lockdown in some places, like Delhi, Bangalore, Bombay, etc., but spread out to the smaller cities, it's spread out to the villages, etc., then the wave will continue. So therefore, there's no other option but to do that. But since we've already delayed it, so the impact will continue much longer. The uncertainty is much greater now than it was last year, because we don't know where else we'll have the wave, where else we'll have to control the situation. So the impact on unemployment in the unorganized sector, which is already visible, the impact on the organized sector will also begin to take place as more and more lockdowns are declared and supply chains get disturbed. As Santosh was pointing out, demand has come down because people are losing jobs, people are losing income. And this is where, like in my book, I have discussed, we have to distinguish between employment and work. I may be a factory worker who's listed as employed because I'm not stuck off the rolls, but I'm not going to the factory, so I'm not working. Similarly, I may be a government servant. I'm not going to office. So I'm in employment, but I'm not working. And I can give you many other such examples. So the loss of work is far greater than the loss of employment. And that's why even in the last wave, when CMI said that 122 million people had lost employment, my argument was that 200 million people had lost work because people are not going to work. People are not able to go to work. So the impact on the economy will be very serious. The impact will be even more serious. So the question is, which will have a greater impact? Suppose we continue like we're doing, some lockdown here, some lockdown there, partial lockdown here. And as you were saying, we don't even call them lockdown. We call them curfews. We call them, some temporary dislocation. We do it for 15 days, then extend by another 15 days, then extend by another 15 days, etc. This will be far more costly than if we had a short and sharp lockdown for 3 weeks. Then the chain of transmission would have broken. And then the transmission from one person to the other person would start coming down, like it has happened in Bombay. Bombay, you sort of started on the 14th, and by the 25th, the number of cases came down. So therefore, you have to do, but as I've written in my book, the imperatives of lockdown are very serious. The imperatives are that you have to disperse people in crowded areas. You have to set up, camps in open grounds, in school buildings which are empty. You have to provide them with food.
Kumar, I see Santosh Mehrotra's hand up. I think he has.
Let me just complete for a moment. Okay. Then So you have, the imperative is that you have to protect your small businesses from collapsing because they are losing their working capital when they stop working. You have to give the people who are in the crowded areas with no income, and as the Azim Premji study showed, that 80% people said they don't have enough money for even 1 week's supplies. So they begin to starve. The moment their work stops, income stops, they begin to starve. So we have enough stock of food. We have 75 million tons of stock of food. We can distribute the food. The goods are not able to come from farm to the cities. And I think we have to treat it like a war. We are in a situation worse than a war. And therefore, we have to get the army and the police out to distribute things to people. If we don't do that, we'll be in trouble, because people are moving. And look at the pyres that are being lighted up in the cremation grounds. Look at the number of digging taking place in the dargahs and so on for burying people. This is a situation in which people are losing hope. People need to be given hope. The uncertainty is great. And when uncertainty is great, things will go bad. And this is where I think what the CA is saying is, don't lose hope. When he says things are not going to be so bad, that's his task basically, to keep the hope up. The IMF is saying the rate of growth will still be 10%, ADB says, but they are predicting on the basis of the past. That's not what the future is. The future is very uncertain. Consumption, has come down. Investment has come down because capacity utilization is low. So therefore, investment is down, employment is down, consumption is down, and therefore the economy will take much longer to revive than what happened in the first wave.
Okay, all right. Professor Mehrotra, go ahead.
Our first focus has to be controlling the number of cases.
Yes.
We come to the economy second. If we control the cases, the economy will begin to take care of itself and the government has to do much more than it did in 2020. So let me deal with the case issue. In the first wave, about 20 to 40 districts, and I am quoting the Lancet most recent 1-week-old report. In the first wave, 20 to 40 districts accounted for about 70% of the country's cases. Now, in this second wave, about 60 to 70 districts account for the 70% of the cases, which means the problem has doubled, but it is still confined to 10% or less of India's districts. There are about 740 districts in the country. So if you are going to lock down the whole country for 70% of the cases, is that a very sensible thing? You can do it for a limited period, very limited period. Your focus has to be the 70 odd districts where the majority of the cases are. You have to address the vaccination issue, the oxygen issue, and every other issue with a certain priority for government hospitals. Please notice, because this is spreading in the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities this time around, unlike last time. Therefore, you have to focus, because our capacities are so limited. This is one thing. And I think the other thing, if those of you who have not listened to Devi Shetty, the head of Narayana Hridayalaya in Bangalore, you should listen to that. And I just blew my mind. I heard what the implications are. I think I need to explain very briefly to your audience what he summarizes, to summarize what he's saying. He's saying that we are going to 5 lakh or 10 lakh cases a day by the middle of May. We currently have in the country about 75,000 ICU beds. It's not just a question of hospital beds, it's a question of ICUs, he said. We will need, as we ramp up the number of cases, an additional 75 to 90,000 ICU beds, new ones in the next few weeks. And this has to be done, he says, in the next 10 days itself, this has to be done. How can we do it? We have to create, he says, 5 lakh new ICU beds in the next few days, when we currently have 75,000 ICU beds. But beds don't treat people. You need human beings. And he walked us all through to where are the people going to come from. So let me very quickly, very briefly tell you what he says. We need 2 lakh new nurses and 1.5 lakh new doctors. He gives a whole, he says, we already have 2.2 lakh nurses in the country who've completed their 3 or 4 year certificate training, and they are preparing to take their exam. Bring them in. This is a wartime situation. Put them in, because we need many more nurses than we need doctors. Then we need doctors. There are 1.3 lakh doctors sitting in the library taking the NEET exam, he said, for their PG seats. He says the National Medical Commission should conduct online tests for NEET now, and only 35,000 seats exist for PG. The remaining 1 lakh doctors should be offered to work for a year in the COVID ICUs for 1 year. And in that case, you get the point. He has a whole plan. If only anyone will listen. If only.
Well, I also want to point out here. I also want to point out here that the story that came out about 10 hours ago says that India has turned down help from the UN for an integrated supply chain of help, saying we have a robust health system. We don't need help from the UN. So we really seem to be living in two parallel universes here. Professor Kumar, before I come back to you, and I know you want to rebut the idea of
no, I just wanted to make a very short point. Testing is totally inadequate. We don't know how many districts are affected. Only where testing is going on, only there we know what is the number of cases. So I don't believe that only, like one study said, 170 districts are reporting, higher numbers. I've talked to people in Azamgarh. I've talked to people in, my driver has gone back to, a very small village in, Madhya Pradesh. He says there's no testing. We don't know, but every house has people unwell, So this idea that, it's only confined to a few districts, I think is something that we have to debunk. It has spread all across the country. And that's why the numbers are so large. And the numbers, of deaths and the number of cases are not even being reported fully. That's point number one. Second is regarding doctors and medical staff. Large number of doctors and medical staff are falling sick. And therefore they're going out, or their parents and families are falling sick. They're going out. And the third point is that you see the doctors and nurses are now having multiple tasks to perform. They're not only having to look after hospital, they also have to do vaccination, So therefore the shortage is far greater than what we are talking about, So we have to, that's why I call in the army and the police, as I was saying, and we have to try and sort this out. Forget everything else, this the new Parliament House building and whatnot we are focusing on, We need to focus entirely on this pandemic in a war-like situation. This is worse than a war.
Guruswamy,
One fact you need, your listeners must know. In 2020, the government of India increased its military expenditure compared to 2019. Increased, and didn't increase anything on health.
Yes. And there were also reports about the fact that the healthcare budget that was announced in the union budget was actually, a lot of it was didn't really translate into all things on the ground. Mr. Guruswamy, I don't know if you want to be the tiebreaker here between deciding whether a lockdown would be economically viable or not, but I want an economic answer to the question of vaccines. Now, the idea of the pricing structure being built by the government of India right now has confused a lot of people, where these two vaccine manufacturers, and let me remind our audience, anyone arguing an open market or a free market or a capitalist market, you can't have that in the middle of a crisis with two people having a monopoly on the product, right? So we have two manufacturers who have a monopoly on the product, who are now deciding between rich and poor, between big state and small state, between this political party and that political party. So on one hand, you have Reliance Industries that has said that it will vaccinate its entire workforce, which is great. But then what happens to the informal workforce? Who vaccinates them? On the other hand, just today, Mr. Guruswamy, before we started this conversation, Gujarat announced it is getting 2.5 crore doses from these two manufacturers. Kerala said that same two manufacturers had turned around and said that there are no doses for you until the end of May. So I want to understand, is there any sort of economic justification for the way this has been designed at all?
There is no economic justification. The problem is that we can only produce 100 million units a month, total, both these companies. And out of which, because of raw material constraints and all this much, they only produce 60 million units. And the price of each unit, it's a single shot, is about $2.50. Now, so a full dose will cost you $5 cost price, ex-factory price. Now, if he doesn't make some profit, he won't have money to invest for expansion. So either you give money for expansion and say expand and take this money as a grant, which is what the US government did for Pfizer and Moderna, gave them $3 billion and said, ramp up your capacity and deliver these vaccines to us. And they did it. So capital has to come from somewhere. They're not in the business, they're not an NGO producing vaccines and collecting money from X, Y, and Z. They have to invest money. And if they go to the banks, banks will take interest on them. So they'll earn their money. So you think of ways of how to ramp up their production capacity, how to allow others to come in. If you gave emergency clearances to Covaxin, you should have given that to the Russian virus, to Sputnik. You should have given it to and to Pfizer. Pfizer came, Pfizer is an mRNA vaccine, and our government said, you'll have to apply and come to us for approval in due process. So Pfizer just went back. So this is no way if you're a crisis.
And they're throwing the states into the ring together where they're fighting each other for that limited supply, plus asking them to import on their own. We understand Maharashtra has now reached out to Pfizer and Moderna to attempt to import the vaccine into the state. Does this make sense? Professor Kumar, I see your hand. I'll come to you.
Maharashtra has the money, which I doubt, because the Pfizer vaccine is about $20 a unit. Where will they get the money to import in numbers? The COVID Shield and Covaxin and Johnson and Gamaleya are your best bets because they're the old adenovirus vaccines. The technology is completely different. You can ramp up and expand the capacity. Now today, Hafkin, Indian Immunologicals, various people have been licensed to produce these viruses, these vaccines. You should have done that 6 months ago.
Right. So let me bring in Professor Kumar. Professor Kumar, both of these suppliers have argued that they need money to basically boost their production capacity, which is true. What is stopping the government of India from giving them that money? Even the 4,500 crore rupees that was announced, we understand, has not reached them.
Vaccination has several issues associated with it. First is, lockdown is not a solution to the disease because it doesn't cure the disease. You need to vaccinate people. To get to herd immunity, which is 60% of the population, you need to get to 84 crore people vaccinated with 2 doses. That's 168 crore. That means, you should have started, if you want to achieve 168 crore, vaccinations in 12 months, you needed to start with at least 10 crore and ramp it up to 20 crore per month. We started with 1 crore in 1.5 months for the frontline workers and so on. At this rate, it would take 23 years to vaccinate everybody. Even if you look at the rate at which we are going at the current moment, we will not be able to vaccinate, these 84 crore people for the next 12, 13 months. In which case, you're talking about this roughly the middle of next year before you can get herd immunity, and therefore the economy cannot start picking up. So we needed, as Mohan was saying, we needed to have planned for it since July. We knew that vaccination would take place. We did not order vaccines till January, 10th, as the Serum Institute says. So therefore, we delayed the whole process. We did not start at the rate of 10 crore, didn't ramp it up to 20 crore by now, so that we could have achieved herd immunity at least by December. So therefore, the disease is going to continue to spread, at least till the herd immunity is achieved by the end of December. That's point number one. Point number two is, when you're producing at such a large scale, large number of people, many experts say that it should cost much less than what Serum Institute, etc., are asking for. And therefore, the question is, can you beat them down to actually, suitable profit, not an extra profit? I think, the very fact that Serum Institute has cut the price down from 400 rupees to 300 shows that they were actually making a profit even on 300. They were making a profit even on 150 rupees that the central government was making. So therefore, my suspicion is that, there's a lot of profiteering. And this is the same as, profiteering on oxygen, profiteering on ambulances, profiteering, on various other supplies of medicines like remdesivir, etc. So I think, there has to be a coordinated move by the central government to plan for the vaccination in the entire country. If you do not have a queue, suppose, you on May 1, you start vaccinating everybody, where are the doses? You are going to have at most, 70, 80 million doses, and you have to vaccinate some like 800 million people. So what kind of queue should be there? The central government has to decide, and the state governments have to implement that. So therefore, the implementation has to be centrally planned. Otherwise, there'll be chaos in hospitals and everywhere. People will be flooding in, and there'll be chaos. You'll have shortage of supplies. And as you were pointing out, Gujarat will get it and Kerala will not get it. West Bengal will get it if the elections have one result. West Bengal will not get it if there's a different result in West Bengal, etc., etc. So this will create further chaos. It'll create a massive problem. So I think vaccination, has to be ramped up, but is not going to be an immediate solution. B, the pricing of vaccine has to be right, and C, it has to be centrally controlled and centrally done. Otherwise, we'll have chaos all over the country. There'll be a lot of politics. And as happened in the US with the ventilators, when states started ordering ventilators individually, then the ventilator producers, they ramped up the price dramatically. When the coordination was there and centrally the ventilators were there or procured, then the price came down because there was one authority controlling the entire procurement. If you make the states compete with each other, the vaccine manufacturers will ramp up their price because they'll make you compete with each other.
But in this particular case, there doesn't seem to be, at least over the table, any room to ramp up the price because they've declared the price beforehand.
It's already high price,
It's
you
already
have
high
much lower
price.
price, right?
Yes.
And also, Mr. Arun Punawala has rented out the most expensive property in London, about 15 days back, which means he has a lot of money.
He always had a lot of money, though, Professor
No, but
Kumar.
the point is he can put in his own capital. I mean, if it's philanthropy, this is a very critical time for the country. And if people don't contribute, and the government has to put in money to take care of the poor people, that's far more important than giving Mr. Arun Punawala the extra money. If he has enough capital of his own, he can invest on his own.
Yes, Professor Mehrotra, so the question obviously about the vaccines, and I just want to point out, Professor Kumar kept saying that you will have chaos across the country. I don't know, I mean, are we saying we should have effectively say more chaos across the country, because what we have right now can effectively be described as desperation and chaos already. I mean, over oxygen cylinders, plus the government has displayed a need, the central government has displayed an intention to distance itself from all of these problems, whether it is oxygen or remdesivir or beds or ICU or lockdowns or now the vaccine, sort of withdrawing from these decisions and allowing the states to sort of handle it on its own?
Yeah, and why? The reason is very clear. Because first they were sleeping and the situation was worsening, and then they suddenly woke up because they were campaigning away and they were organizing the Kumbh. And suddenly when they woke up, the situation had gone out of control. So this is precisely the best time to hand over the reins of the management to the states so that they don't get the political fallout of that. It depends. Sorry, Mohan, you are trying to say.
For a guy who ran such a tightly controlled, centralized ship, he's now passing the buck. He's wanting to take the blame.
Precisely. He doesn't want to take the blame. Why should he take the blame? Why should the central government take the blame? That's the game.
The one responsible.
I agree with Santosh. The game is to shift the blame and not have the blame fall on the, international press is noticing how we have lost the thing, whether it be in France or Australia or USA, everywhere the press is saying that. And I think the central government will try and shift the blame to the state governments. And that's why the chaos takes place. But the question is, the central authority is responsible for a large number of these things, It delayed the situation. In my book itself, I had pointed out in July when I wrote my book that the second wave is likely to come. I pointed out what needed to be done, and they, if I, who's a lay person, if I could predict it, why could the experts not do it? Why could the central government not be ready for it, And as Santosh rightly pointed out, this Nandurbar, district magistrate who took advance action, who could anticipate, many other people could have also anticipated that if the second wave, third wave comes in Europe and America, etc., it can come anywhere. It could come in India as well.
And we had Professor Kumar, healthcare experts, Professor Dr. Srinath Reddy, who's a public health expert in the country, said very clearly on the 21st of January in an interview, he said that there will be a second surge. There's no doubt about it. The government is taking it easy. People are being allowed to congregate at festivals while the rest of the world is dealing with the second and third waves. And this was exactly the same time that the Prime Minister addressed Davos and congratulated himself for winning the battle against COVID and said that we're okay, we're fine, we've done this.
But why are you surprised, Faye? This is exactly the nature of this government. It is dominated by semi-literate people, by very poorly educated people who take the decisions, and they are the ones who are calling the shots. They don't consult experts. The experts are not in the driving seat. Had they been in the driving seat and had they been listened to over the course of a last year, the country would not be in this situation. This is the foundational problem.
I'm surprised, genuinely surprised, because the visuals coming out of our country right now will melt the heart of the most cold person. These are at the end of the day human beings who are Indians, who are begging, who are pleading, who are crying on the streets.
Maybe so. Faye, let's just remind our viewers that just 19 years ago in Gujarat, the same gentlemen and the ladies oversaw thousands of their citizens being killed in Mahatma Gandhi's state.
Unfortunately. Mr. Guruswamy, what needs to be done now? Because I don't want to believe that it's ever too late to fix this. If the government were to set up war rooms that are working day in and day out at fixing the oxygen problem, we understand the US is now sending over $100 million worth of equipment as we speak. So is the EU, so various other parts of the world. If this equipment was equitably distributed to state governments based on who needs what, if vaccines were distributed enough and fast enough, would we be able to get on top of this?
I'm afraid there are no easy solutions now. There are no textbook solutions either. There is a certain pain, certain process which has to be gone through. And we will have to bear the pain and suffer the consequences of having a megalomaniac at the helm of things.
And have a
megalomaniac
at the helm of events. And that is the problem. He's a man who does not listen to anybody, who does not consult anybody, who does not have any advisors. He listens to his own inner voice, and the only person he consults is when he looks at himself in the mirror. That is the problem. And those of us who know him, we know the man. I wrote about this in 2013 and 2014, that I don't expect anything from this man. You know, he is the worst person to have in this situation. He will say that it's a weak nation is paying the price. Is he calling off the Char Dham Yatra now? Is going to take place this month?
It has been called off.
Has been called off, yeah. But you know, but look at the fuss they made over Tablighi Jamaat, 2,800 people gathered, and they went on a rampage all over the country. 4 million people gathered in Haridwar. There's no talk about transmission, about vectors. You see, very clear that this is a man who cannot admit mistakes. First thing to learn to set right a problem is to admit your mistake. Admit that something went wrong. He will not admit it. And nobody else will admit it. Because anybody else in the government who admits it will be accused of being disloyal and chopped off.
All right, I have a few minutes left. We'll give it to Professor Kumar. Go ahead, sir.
Very quickly, we know what the leadership is, what the problems are, as Mohan rightly said, very autocratic, megalomaniac and so on and so forth. But I think, we need to press that there be a council set up under the Prime Minister of all the chief ministers of the states, whether he agrees on it or not, but I think a coordination is needed across the states with the center, which is not happening. And we are playing politics, like in Delhi and other places, we see politics between the center and the states. That has to stop. Secondly, we treat it like a war, bring out the army and the police and, implement a lockdown and distribution and testing, ramp up testing like massive. We don't know where all the disease is spread, etc., etc. And a short and sharp lockdown is necessary. And for that, we need to coordinate the executive. So under the cabinet secretary, there needs to be a committee of all the chief secretaries and the DGPs of police so that they can coordinate the administrative aspect of the problem. That would also democratize and also take care of the federalism issue, which is being undermined. Federalism is being undermined by, the central government playing politics with who gets what. That needs to stop. Otherwise, the credibility of the government will keep going down and the population will keep suffering. So I think we need to begin with these if we are to try and control the situation in the short run, because the vaccine, etc., will only talk about the long run and the medium run. But immediately we need to really bring the situation of hospitalization, of deaths, etc., under some kind of control.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for giving me your time this evening and having this conversation. Obviously, without a shadow of doubt, we're going to have to continue to discuss the economy over the rest of the year. Hopefully, things will get reasonably back on track, or the people making the decisions will realize that express measures are needed. But until then, all we can do is bring you the information and the experts. Thank you for watching. Our news is up at exactly 9 o'clock this evening for our viewers. Do take a look at it, leave us some feedback at the bottom of the video. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Thank you.